know about you, but I used to really, really struggle when someone would ask me, what is the mission and the vision of your business? And I'd be really, really stuck. I think about all the fanciful vision statements that I'd seen around the place, and I try to craft, 2 to 3 sentences or a whole paragraph, and very often it became like a whole page. And then you hear what people say, which is, it can't be so long that your team can't remember. Like, it's really got to be short and sharp. And then I'm like, so what exactly is the difference between a vision and a mission? Like, and then what's the point anyway? How do you actually make that operational so that it actually guides your team? In this video, you're going to hear me unpack this really neat, nice and simple. And here's the best thing. It's actually going to help you to create job descriptions, policies, procedures, processes, and performance conversations that will make so much more sense. I'm Valerie Ling. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm also the director of a wellbeing practice in Sydney, and I'm all about helping private practice leaders get from prison to freedom. What helps healthcare professionals to understand why there is a vision and a mission is, I find, generally to think about it in 2 ways. Using an advocacy voice. There's either something that we're trying to get rid of in the world, in our community, in the population group that's really precious to us, or there's something that we're trying to get for them or augment for them in the population or community or the group that we're really interested in. In our practice, the vision for a group of people that we are really passionate and we really care about and we feel are very special to us is, we want to see a world without burnout for them. So our vision is a world without burnout. Now, if you look at my business, Effective Living, we have an augmentation vision. And that is every person to be empowered to live an effective life. In fact, in our team videos, we actually ask all the practitioners this same question: what does effective living mean to you? And it's fascinating to see how they all interpret it a little bit differently, but it really does come down to a core desire to see respect and dignity and freedom and a life of meaning for the clients that we work with. So a vision statement, I think, works really best when it's succinct and it's linked to something that healthcare professionals can understand, by either getting rid of something in a patient's world or bringing something that it will transform their life. So that's your vision statement. So a vision tells us what is the future world that we see for the population, or the treatment population that we feel so special and so precious to us about. What is that? The mission statement actually tells us how are we going to do that? What's the mission? What's the mission? So for the vision of a world without burnout, the mission is to impact the high industry burnout professionals. And then I added, starting with hospitals, schools, clergy, and the healthcare professionals, right? So that's something that I used to say, I still do actually. Our mission is to basically infuse a world without burnout, starting with these key professions. So the mission tells us, okay, if it's a world without burnout, what's the strategy? How are we going to do this, right? How, from a top line view, what is the mission, boss? So what is the mission, leader? How are we going to do this, bring about a world without burnout? Now, if you ask effective living, that's a different mission again, in terms of bringing, individuals through, the mission, that's different. In one line, I just say that for us, that mission is through partnerships, right? Through partnerships. So you got your vision, you've got your mission. Now, we're all going on this journey, contacting industries and checking in on them and seeing if we can help them to get to a world without burnout. How, in terms of what is going to represent us, when we go out and do this, these are your values, right? And so we have the values of, we're going to be doing it with professionalism. We're going to be doing it with respect. We're going to be doing this generously, right? So these are your values that you cultivate so that everybody on your team then understands, oh, okay, these are the 5 ways that we are going to express ourselves in terms of carrying out the vision and the mission. Values then unpack further into behaviors, right? They tell us the types of behaviors that we're looking for when we're interacting with our clients or when we're interacting with one another. Now, you could draw a line there, but I'm going to go a couple of steps further because I think this is where the leadership conversation gets us into a pickle when we are leading healthcare providers. Okay, because healthcare providers are essentially trained to be clinically competent, to be ethical, and to have high standards. And very often we get confused whether we're talking about a clinical standard or we're talking about a value statement. Why are we having conflict with one another? What are we actually talking about? And because we've not actually had exposure to a commercial environment, we don't think about the conversation going upwards there. We just hone in straight into ethical conversations of standards. So I go one level down in our team, right? So we've got the vision, the mission, the values, the standards. Now, this is going to tell us how we know we're actually doing a good job for our clients as well as with one another. Do you get that? How do we know we're doing a good job for our clients as well as with one another? Now, standards in our environment have 3 components. Stay with me. Right? Because how do we know? How do we know? Standards, this is where data comes in. Now, you can call them key performance indicators. I prefer to call them key engagement indicators. How do we know? Well, we look at team-based data to help us to see whether our clients are staying with us, whether they're giving us feedback through the data, that they're canceling more often on us, right? So the standards help us to know whether or not as a team we are actually providing a service that's helping with the vision and the mission and helping people to live a world without burnout or to have effective lives. That's one standard. The other standard is our clinical governance standards, right? So that helps us to understand whether or not the way that we are delivering our services clinically, whether we're remaining competent, whether we're remaining ethical, whether we are, doing a quality clinical service, right? Now, in our business, those clinical standards have got different ways for us to measure it. We can ask for client feedback, we can have supervision with one another, we can have, we have conversations to understand our standards. And here's the third one that I don't know of any other business that does this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we have character standards, right? Character standards in our business basically points to character qualities that point to a maturity. Now, why did I put this in? I used to sit and ponder and wonder, what is missing? What is missing? Yes, we've got typical competency frameworks. That's the clinical standards, right? We know when someone has got knowledge and whether they're using the right treatment plans, but there's still something missing. And essentially what I arrived at is when you're a healthcare provider, a lot of you goes into the service that you provide to your client, as well as to the support and the professionalism that you provide to one another. And depending on your work experience, you may not have had a deep formation experience, right? To actually try to figure out how do you actually transition into a workplace and form as a professional. So in our business, we have a third standard, which is basically the maturity and professional standards. And they are all character qualities like humility, like the willingness to say, I am sorry. I've forgotten what we've called that. There's something there. The characteristics of looking out for someone else, right? Those are our standards. And we celebrate all three, all three. So in our client engagement, we can celebrate that by releasing quarterly statistics. In our clinical standards, we can celebrate that when people have passed certain training frameworks or registrar, training pathways, or when they, present a paper, all of those things, when we get client feedback. And character standards, now here's an interesting one. This is where at a quarterly level, when I meet with each of the people that I manage and I lead, giving them feedback of how that has been noticed and creating a rhythm that whenever the team gets together, that we celebrate these maturity qualities that we're seeing in one another and how we're developing and how we've noticed it, right? So those are standards. Then we go one level down again. So now that we know the outcomes that we want, what do we do? What is it that we do to get to those standards? Well, you have some high-level things in that tier called policies. Policies essentially give us a leadership understanding or a high-level understanding of what our policy is for how we manage cancellations, for how we manage our time, for how we manage our session notes. What is the policy that will guide us to know that we're heading in the right direction to meet those standards that are a direct expression of our values that get us closer to the mission and fulfill the vision, right? Then the last level, procedures. Once you've got your policies, your procedures then actually, literally spell out step by step, right? So if we've got professionalism that guides standards, punctuality, and things like that, which is the policy of how we manage our sessions, then the procedure actually tells us how to book, right? What happens if this happens? Where to find this? How to do this? So that we are able to achieve one streamlined story into values, into behaviors, into actions. So here's what I would now like to finish with. Very often, we get into a pickle in a kind of private practice prison because we don't know where to have the conversation with the team member that we're talking to, especially when things are going wrong. And we also don't know, hit or miss, like, do we write a policy about how to use the printer? Well, the answer to that is you got to filter up. Is one of your standards technological efficiency? If it's not, and you don't want a kind of a standardized experience for your client and your team on how to use a printer, that's probably more like an operational manual that just sits somewhere as being, here's how you use the printer for your reception, perhaps, okay? When you're having a difficult conversation with someone, knowing those levels is really helpful, because I maintain that as a leader, our first responsibility is to own the conversation and to figure out, what is this question or what is this difficulty? Don't always assume, and that's what happens with healthcare providers. We assume straight away it must be a clinical standards conversation. Not necessarily. Many a times I have been surprised that what I thought was a breach of a clinical standard was something totally different. And we want to ask ourselves, we want to actually ask our team member, can you help me to understand what you did, how you did it, why you did it, what went beforehand? And as you're listening, and I would seriously suggest that you don't do this in conversation, but you send, an email, a very short email that just asks, you can ask yourself, is this behavior or is the situation happening because I actually didn't have an induction conversation with them right up the top, right? A world without burnout. How does this, maybe they didn't realize that. Maybe they were veering in this direction and, getting cranky with us because they thought that we were on about something else, maybe disability support as being the prime focus for us. Is it a question of not being inducted? They don't really understand the vision. How have we not actually understood how their mission aligns with ours? What does effective living mean to you? Listening in. Effective living means this. You're really big on the vocational aspect of that. You're really big on the family relationships aspect. How we actually have that conversation. Do they actually know what their job is? Kind of how they fit in. Do they know, what we stand for, what characteristics, like where is this level? What's missing in the leadership conversation that has stacked it for our team member such that this outcome has happened? Now, sometimes you may go through all of that and you might actually realize that, it is actually a clinical standards issue, or it's a client retention issue, a client engagement. But then you can have that conversation again to say, let's look at how we can help you, right? So knowing the different levels, bringing our team along in those different levels, making sure they know what that is, will actually help us to figure out what that conversation is. And as a leader, you can also then start to figure out, the number of conversations that I'm getting or questions. Like I always know that there must be some kind of procedure or policy missing when a few people are starting to ask the same question. So it's not an individual. For example, sick leave. When I have a few people trying out or experimenting and, then you kind of go, why didn't they read the policy about that? Or then you think, maybe we don't have, like very often those operational questions can also signal that there's something missing in that stacking picture. I'd love to know what you think about this. Send me an email, leave me a comment. Make sure you subscribe if you want to hear the next installation of private practice prison to private practice leadership freedom.